And today we have Cheryl speaking again, and the topic's going to be the last frost and transplanting. So Cheryl's going to give a presentation, and then after we're going to have a question and answer session. So if you want to type in questions into the chat as she goes, we'll read them at the end. Or if you want to unmute yourself at the end, you can ask your questions then. So Cheryl, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and we can get into it.
Perfect. I'm Cheryl Normando. I'm a garden writer and a master gardener, and I'm interested in gardening of all types. I've written several books co-authored with Janet Melrose, who some of you who live in Calgary might know. And we've done on various topics, everything from small space gardening to seeds growing, vegetables growing, trees and shrubs, that kind of thing. So so today I'm going to talk about last frost and transplanting. And we're getting around to that time of the year, which is awesome, finally, after all of this crazy weather. So what we're assuming is that you've got your seedlings in your classroom, you're ready to plant them outdoors. We're just going to try to talk about things that will get you prepped for, and your plants prepped for getting them out into the big wide open there. So first thing you've got to know is your frost dates for the area. So wherever you're living in Alberta, generally across the province, there's sort of zones, well, hardiness zones, obviously, but there's also frost dates based on those hardiness zones. So you can check your Canadian hardiness zone maps online. There's various resources that you can check that on. But generally, if you're in places like Calgary, Grand Prairie, Medicine Hats, Red Deer, those kinds of places, your last frost dates range between May 11th and May 20th. If you're in Edmonton, you're lucky. You actually are, your frost dates are actually May 1st to 10th, your last frost dates. Those are not guarantees, obviously. Definitely they're based on historical averages. So you've got to take a lot of different factors into account. That's not just because we say that they're going to be those dates doesn't mean that that's necessarily the case. I know in Calgary, just a few years ago, we had our last frost date on June the 10th. So that's pretty scary when you think about it. And you've also got to take into account microclimates in your garden as well. So if your school garden's situated on the base of a hill, for example, the frost might, the cold air will slump down into that hilly area. So if it's situated down at the base, you may end up getting frost when the surrounding areas do not get frost. Maybe you've got lots of walls, concrete, that kind of thing around your school garden. That means that you might have a little bit of a heat zone in there. And so you might end up having a warmer situation. You might not get any frost in that area. You might be able to plant a little bit earlier. So take into account the microclimates as well. So your cool season crops are going to go out early, a little bit earlier than your warm season ones. They can handle the chillier weather. So that's things like broccoli, kale, cauliflower, your lettuce, peas, those kinds of things. They can handle the chillier weather a little bit better than some of the other crops. So you can plant them out a little bit earlier. You're going to want to protect them, just in case. I'll talk about frost protection a little later on. But your warm season crops are the ones you're going to want to hold off on a little bit. Those are ones like tomatoes, peppers, what else? Squash, those kinds of things, corn. You're going to want to wait on those ones for a little bit. Generally, actually, I plant my tomatoes in Calgary the first week of June, if I can. I have actually held off until the second week. It just depends. I kind of watch the weather like a hawk, check the forecasts, that kind of thing. Always have something ready so that you can cover them these first initial weeks. Because you never know. We could end up definitely having some sort of a frost. They'll tell you on the 5 o'clock news and you'll be scrambling. So what you're looking for your warm season crops when you're going to want to plant those out is when the temperature is consistently about 10 to 15 degrees during the day. So that sounds pretty warm right about now, but it's going to get there in the next couple of weeks. So you don't want it to be any colder than 5 degrees at night, and even 5 degrees at night is pushing it for things like tomatoes and peppers. So definitely cover them if it's only that temperature at night. I like to see closer to 10, but I mean, this is Alberta. So just make sure you have frost covers available. So let's talk about frost covers. You don't need to buy anything fancy unless you want to. I know you can get beautiful glass cloches at garden centers. They're expensive, but they're really lovely. It's not something that you're going to put in a school garden. You can buy row covers and just use stakes. Those are really that's an economical kind of way of protecting your plants and protecting a lot at once or just a few. So you would basically just set up a tent situation and put row cover. Row cover is made out of polyethylene or polyester fabric. It's that white stuff you see. You can buy it in bulk sometimes, depending on greenhouse suppliers have it in bulk, but you can just buy it at any box store or garden center. You can just buy it in a bag. So that is an excellent way of just protecting your plants in these early stages. So you can also, if you want, milk jugs work really well. They you can cut the tops off of 4-liter plastic milk jugs and make a little tiny greenhouse. Pop it over your plants, and just make sure you take all of this stuff off in the daytime the next day after the frost event or the cold weather event, just so that you're not cooking your plants. Because if the temperature rises the next day, those little protective devices are going to get really hot inside. So you don't want to go from one extreme to the other. So yeah, absolutely. You can even use speaking of milk jugs, you can also use 2-liter milk jugs, like the Tetra type, the cardboard kind, the wax cardboard ones, if you've got plants that are small enough to fit into them. So yeah, that works really well. In a pinch, if you've got them on hand, go for it. Do that. Um, so we figured out all the frost dates. Now let's talk about prepping your beds. So if you're planting in ground or raised beds, you're gonna want to make sure your soil's in good shape before you even think about putting those plants in your garden. So if you need to add compost or fertilizer or anything to your beds, this is the time to do it while you're waiting for the weather to stabilize. You can definitely do all these things like right now. So I sometimes prep my beds in the fall, but you can also prep them in the spring. It doesn't matter which way you do it. So this year I'm going to do it in the spring because last year I had time crunch, so I didn't get it done in the fall. So I add about a layer of 1 to 2 inches of compost every year. And that helps with soil texture. It also gets the soil microorganisms going, so they're going to be chewing on something, getting your air in your soil, and they're going to be working on all the nutrients and that kind of thing. I also add some fertilizers. Compost, it doesn't have a measurable amount of fertilizer in it, like certain things like kelp meal does, or fish fertilizer does. They've got measurable amounts of fertilizer in them. So compost is really good, but it's just sort of a general, it's got a little bit of this and a little bit of that in it. So you're going to want to add something like kelp meal. Fish fertilizer is awesome. All of those things are readily available in any garden center. They're not very expensive, so they're a good one to try. So you're going to want to add those. You use the rate available, like they'll have a rate on the packaging. So don't dig this stuff in. We're kind of going to a more no-till gardening situation sort of now. We're kind of focused on that. The science is sort of, the research is kind of leading to letting us know that soil structure can be affected by tilling. We're looking at also that maybe we're harming soil life a little bit by tilling too deeply. So we want to keep the structure. We want to keep all of that going. And we also don't want to bring up perennial weed seeds that are dormant in the soil. So we want to just, all of these fertilizers and compost, you're just going to put it on the top of the soil, and you're just going to lightly put it in, just maybe the top inch. Just work it in so that it's evenly spaced throughout the entire bed. Don't be digging. You don't need to. If your soil is good and not compacted, you don't need to do that at all. And compost will help with compacted soil. So, so the more you add, the better it is. Every year, keep working on that. So it's a really good thing. So if you're square foot gardening, you're going to want to add a little bit of Mel's Mix. Those of you who square foot garden know about Mel Bartholomew. He was the creator of square foot gardening. And he's got special, he designed sort of a special mix that you're supposed to put in your raised beds for square foot gardening. So you've got compost in that mix, you've got peat moss, and you've got vermiculite. So you're going to want to set that up if you're doing square foot gardening. You're also going to want to set up your gridding system if you haven't already. Some people who've done it in the past may have a gridding system already in place. Like for square foot gardening, you're going to measure your spacing. And so some people may have already designed, they'll do it out of wood a lot of times. They'll make sort of a frame. Some people do it with string. If you've done it with string, you're probably going to have to redo it this year. It may have degraded over the winter time. So yeah, set all that up. You've got time to do that right now. So definitely do that while we're kind of waiting for this weather to stabilize a little bit. Um, I can also in the Alberta School Garden group, I'll put up some links to the way to grid a square foot gardening bed. I'll put up some stuff about the hardening or the hardiness zones and the frost dates, that kind of thing. I'll make sure I add all that in there too. Stephanie, I can also send that to you too if you want to pass that along to everyone. I can send the links to that. So yeah, because it's kind of an interesting process. So yeah, and there's some great videos online about it. So if you're going to set up a hoop tunnel, now's the time to do that too. When you're preparing all your beds and all that kind of thing, if you've got a raised bed and you're going to put a hoop tunnel up, um, these are really great protective devices for early season to extend the season both now in the early part and then also at the end in fall. You can also use them as insect barriers as well. Certain types of insects really love to get in to your garden crops. So you can use the row cover fabric to sort of prevent them. So if you stretch it over the hoops, you can prevent things like flea beetles and cabbage moths and stuff like that. So let's see. So you can set that up. I usually use PVC piping for setting up my hoops. You can buy kits. I know I've seen them at various garden centers and that kind of thing. So if you have the money to do that, do that. But PVC piping is inexpensive and it works like a charm. So you can bend that, put it over top of your beds, and then you're going to put your row cover fabric over top. I have actually also used hula hoops, which you can buy at the dollar store, and they're really fun and colorful, and they're cheap, and they work really, really well. They actually even are sturdy enough to last 3 seasons in Calgary, which is impressive. So yeah, they're really fun for a child's garden. I think they're awesome. So if you don't want to go the PVC pipe route, definitely take some hula hoops apart and make them into the hoops. They're fun. They're so fun. So yeah, so definitely set all that stuff up now. There's some designs online too. You can kind of you can take a look at. I'll put some links up for that as well, just so you can kind of see what's available, what ideas there are for those kinds of concepts. So if you're planting in containers, that's another thing you have to think about. You've got to get all your growing medium ready to go in those as well. It's not just about the garden beds. So don't use garden soil from the beds in your containers. What happens with that is they get all compacted and hard. It basically turns into cement. So your roots get all wet when you water and they get all waterlogged and you can't control that. So definitely use a potting mix. You can use one that you purchased commercially, or you can make your own. I usually use 1 part black earth. You can buy black earth at any garden center. Compost, definitely 1 part compost. You can use perlite as well, or vermiculite. I prefer perlite, but you can definitely use vermiculite. You can also throw in some peat moss or coconut fiber as well. I know some people are concerned about the sustainability and or carbon footprint with those 2 items, with peat moss or coconut fiber. That's something I'll leave up to you definitely to make that decision. It's a huge debate. So yeah, and I don't know if there's any really right answer, but definitely use that. Use your own judgment with that one. So for sure, I know a lot of commercial potting mixes do have peat moss in them for sure. So yeah, it's just something to think about. You can use any containers that you want for your outdoor garden. So it just depends on what you're looking at, what you're going to plant. What size space you have, what type of look you're going for, that kind of thing. They need to be able to be durable enough to handle the weather. You're going to bring them in, obviously, probably in the winter, unless they're really big planter boxes or something that can handle the weather. But I mean, if you're buying plastic or resin or something like that, you're going to bring them in for winter. But during the summer, they get beat down on with the sun or hail or whatever. So make sure that they're durable enough. I know I had a friend who bought ceramic containers and one of the hailstorms completely took them out. So definitely it's not fun. So yeah, buy something that's durable for whatever area you're in. Make sure that the containers have really, really good drainage. That's something that you have to think about. You don't want the roots to rot of your plant, like the plant roots to rot. So make sure you've got really good drainage. Other than that, you're sort of ready now. Make sure you've got all your weeds taken out of all of your containers, your planters, your beds. Weed them all thoroughly before you get started. Don't leave this task. Don't plant into a bunch of weeds because especially with students, they're not going to necessarily be able to tell what's a weed and what's not. So make sure you clean that all up right away, right off the bat. It also prevents a lot of heartache later on. You don't have to deal with all of that stuff. So you've got a nicely fresh, new weeded bed. Um, get your garden tools together as well. Anything that you think you're going to need for the season, make sure you've got it. Now's the time to go shopping for all of those things. So definitely do that. Next thing, the most important thing, probably besides the frost days, is getting ready to transplant. You need to harden your little plant babies off, so that nobody loses them. They can't just go from an indoor environment to an outdoor environment. They will get really severely shocked. The interior is dry, typically anyway. Our interiors of our homes and our businesses are dry, so it's going to be they're going to go from that to a more humid environment. They're going to go to a really cold environment, especially at this time of year, and they're just not going to be able to handle it. So you need to harden them off, and that's probably the most important thing you have to do. And it is a long, tedious process. But it's worth it. You have to do it. You absolutely have to do it. So get your students on board with this. Get them to help, because it means you're going to be lugging plants in and out on a daily basis, probably. So hopefully you don't have a zillion different plants. If you have a greenhouse, you can make this step a little bit easier, because typically at this time of year, your greenhouses are going to be a little bit warmer. So you're going to be able to probably put a lot of your plants out in the greenhouse already. But if you're going straight from your indoor classroom garden to your outdoor garden, you're going to have to make sure you harden everything off. So to do that, you're going to take 7 days is the very minimum that you're going to want to do a hardening off process. I recommend 10 to 14, honestly. It sounds like forever, but if you get started now, you're going to be right on time. So what you do basically is I know the weather's supposed to change here in Calgary over the weekend, so it's supposed to get quite cold. I'm in the middle of hardening off my onions. I planted onions from seed, so I'm going to actually leave them indoors this weekend. But around that, I'm going to make sure that they go outside for a little bit every single day. So I'm putting them out for a few hours. I started off at about 3-4 hours a day. I'm going to steadily increase that to 6, 7, 9 hours a day. I'm going to put them in a sheltered spot to start off with, out of the wind if I can. I'm going to keep them out of bright, direct sunlight, because I don't want them to frizzle fry while they're out there. They're very, very tender right now, so you don't want to risk hurting them at this point in the game. So keep them in a sheltered spot. As the days go on and your exposure increases, you can also get them out into a little bit more light, a little bit more wind. Don't put them out in a gale force, So I know like Lethbridge and stuff like that, you guys have really, really crazy wind over there. Don't put them out in sort of really persistent, consistent wind, but definitely give them a little bit more exposure as the time goes on. Bring them in every night. That's the key to this right now. They're still too tender to keep out overnight. By the end of the 10, 14 days, you're going to be able to leave them out overnight. Maybe with protection, you might have to still cover them, but they're going to be able to handle that. So that is the most important thing. That gets them ready to go into the ground or into the containers or anywhere that they have their permanent home outside. So you need to do that. Definitely. Seriously, it's the most important thing you have to do. So after all of that, then you can finally plant. So the day before you're ready to plant, water your garden beds really, really well. Water your containers as well. Water them, get them all ready to go. So basically, you don't want to saturate the soil. So you don't want water pooling on top, but you want to bring it almost to that level. So you're going to just watch your watering and just make sure you give it a good soak. Your garden bed, your whatever, your in-ground, your raised bed, your containers, give them a really good soaking. The reason why this is a good idea is because then you're transplanting into moist soil. It's way easier to do that than to do it into dry soil. Also, it means that you don't have to water the next day. When you're transplanting the next day, you can just basically put your plants in, and you don't have to give them a big guzzle of water at that time. So you're ready to go. So it makes your job a lot easier, and it's better for the plants as well. So water your beds really, really well, and then the next morning, hopefully the weather is cooperative. Hopefully you've got a cool but not cold morning. If it is, if you find that the morning is still a little bit too cold at this point, you can wait a little bit. Wait until closer to midday if it's not too hot. The key is not, you don't want to transplant ever into hot conditions. So it's going to have to be a little bit cooler. Overcast is brilliant. That's kind of what you're looking for, not hot sun. Um, so you're looking at a cloudy, cool day, then you're ready to go. So get the kids out there and get planting. Um, Watch for the spacing of your plants when you're planting. Um, the temptation is to crowd them all together, especially if you've got a very small garden bed or small baskets or pots or that kind of thing. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to space them according to whatever it was that is said on your seed packages. So if your seed packages said you're supposed to space 12 inches apart, because the plant, when it grows to maturity, is going to need that space, that's what you're looking for. So it depends on the crop. And if you can't remember, like if you don't have the seed packages anymore, there's some excellent resources online that give you, like you can just look up whatever, say it's a carrot, a Chardonnay carrot, you can just look up what kind, what spacing you're looking up for that one. So it might need, I don't know, a couple inches or 3 inches, 4 inches, whatever. So you're going to want to look up all of that. So you can do that online. There's, like I said, there's lots of really good resources for that. But space them out properly. That way, then you don't have to dig them up later on. Then the other thing that you have to do is set up any supports that you have to put up. So if you've got tomatoes, if you're planting out tomatoes, make sure you put up your tomato cages. If you are planting peas, make sure you set up your trellises for them. Do that all now while you're transplanting so that it's not so hard later on. If you've got bigger plants, it's very, very hard to put a cage around a tomato plant that's 3 feet wide, So yeah, absolutely do that early in the game for sure. And then after you've planted, once you've got everything in the ground and everything is looking great, and it should, add some mulch. Mulch is a really, really, really good thing. It helps keep the soil moisture intact. It regulates soil temperature. It keeps the weeds at a more manageable level. It's really, really awesome. So in hot summers, seriously, it's a lifesaver. Last summer, if I wouldn't have mulched my beds, I may have lost some of the plants that I had in them. It was just so hot and I couldn't keep up with watering. So definitely, especially in a school garden scenario, I think that's a really, really good idea for sure. So I like using clean straw in my vegetable garden. You can use dried leaves, you can use grass clippings, anything like that works like a charm. I have a gardening friend who uses burlap. She just tacks it down. She just tacks it down in between the plants. That works really, really well as well. Don't use hay. It might contain weed seeds, so it can be a problem. Just make sure if you're going to use something, use straw is a better option than hay. Use a 1 to 2 inch layer of mulch. Don't push it right up against the plants. If you do that, the moisture might stay too close to the plant stems and it can cause rot. And a fun project that I want to tell you all about was about adding oyas to your garden. They're watering devices. They're based on sort of a wicking principle. Their traditional oyas are Latin American in origin. They're clay vessels that sort of look like vases. They've got really, really long necks. They're buried in the ground close to the plants that they're supposed to help. And water is filled, we just fill them up with water. And then as the soil dries out, the water gets pulled out of the vessel, the clay, because the clay is porous. It's pulled out into the soil, and it's very, very useful if sort of as an additional watering device. I mean, you're still going to need to water. You're still going to need to get the hose out or the drip irrigation or whatever it is. But these are really good additional things if you can't be there all the time. So they can be a little bit of extra help. You can make them out of terracotta pots. They're really easy, and older students would have such a fun time with this. So I'll put up a link to that as well. And then, yeah, you can check that out and see if you want to craft some of those. They're really fun. So, and then basically keep up with watering. Don't water too much. Your newly transplanted seedlings, they don't need a lot of water. They're also not going to want to be dry. So make sure you strike a balance. You won't need to fertilize right away. because you added all of that compost and the fertilizers to your beds when you prep them. There's no need to fertilize. So basically, just keep everything protected during these early days. Keep them protected from cold, that kind of thing. And one final thing I wanted to mention, you may see some pests early on. One of the big ones is cutworms. They like to take out seedlings. They basically leave your mature plants alone, but they like little baby plants. So cutworms will usually come out at night. They come out of the soil, and they basically slice off your seedlings right at the soil level. So if you get in the next morning into your garden and you see the plants laying down and they've been cut right at the soil level, probably cutworms. There is an easy way to fix this. You can just do some recycling. So grab some empty yogurt containers. The individual ones are really, really good if they fit over top of your plants. Cut the bottom out and then just sink them, like put them at like a tube over top of your plants. Sink them a few inches into the earth. They don't need to be covering the upper part of your plant that much. They just need to be, you want them to sink into the earth a little bit because that's where the cutworms are going to cut. So protect that base of that stem. That's the key. And they won't cross the barrier, or they're not supposed to cross the barrier. I've had really good luck with this. So, and then once the plants get larger, the cutworms will leave them alone. So you can remove the tubes and wash them and store them for next year. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for this part of the presentation. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of topics, so hopefully that's helpful to all of you.
Yeah, that was awesome, Cheryl. Thank you. If anybody has any questions now, if you want to either type it into the chat and I can read it out loud, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. And while everyone's taking time to do that, I do have one question for you here, Cheryl. So you
Sure.
talked briefly about cool season crops in the
Yeah.
beginning. So do you still need to harden off cool season crops?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you got to do the same thing as you do with the warm season ones, but they can go out earlier. So some people I know, some gardeners I know in Calgary have already, and I think probably Edmonton as well, and all over the province have probably put out their cool season crops already. But yeah, definitely harden them off, go through the same process. They still need that as well. Yeah, absolutely. Even though they can tolerate the colder temperatures, they will still need, because the transition from indoors to outdoors is so great. So yeah.
And is it true that the frost or cooler temperatures can help with the taste of some vegetables or fruit?
Yeah, that's actually true. So a lot of times we talk about carrots, parsnips. I know some people say beets. I haven't really noticed that beets taste any different with they've been partially frozen, but carrots definitely taste sweeter. Yeah, it changes the sugars. It alters the way that the starches are transformed into sugars. So absolutely, you don't want this to be a really killing frost though. So you want this to be sort of a light frost at the end of the season, when your carrots are just like late September kind of thing, when the frosts just start coming in, or early October, when you just start getting frosts. That's the key. It can't be really, really hard killing frosts, but these few light frosts, carrots taste amazing after they've been frozen. So yeah, for sure, it changes them.
Okay, awesome.